welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is the top 20 cards from Innistrad Crimson Vow for Commander. And yes, I got a top 20 list here. Haven't done that for a while, which means that I think this set was a really good Commander set. A lot of fantastic cards in here for Commander. Like Modern Horizons 2, I would say it's probably better for the 99 than it is Commanders. Some of the Commanders are really good, but I really like a lot of the 99 cards that are in this set. I'm going to start out with an honorable mention. Savior of Ollenbock, 1 white human soldier 1/2 has this new ability training from the set. Whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. When Savior of Ollenbock trains, exile up to one other target creature from the battlefield or creature card from a graveyard. When Savior of Ollenbock leaves the battlefield, put the exiled cards onto the battlefield under their owner's control. So I really like the diversity of all the different things this card can do. It can exile creatures from the battlefield, get them out of the way, exile creatures from graveyards. Probably the best way to use this card is I exile my own big creature out of my graveyard, and then when this leaves play, I can put it directly onto the battlefield, right? It's a resurrection effect for your creatures in mono white, which is great. However, I don't like this training ability. I really don't. I think it's difficult to use. I mean, you just look at this creature on its own. It's a 1/2. You have to attack with this creature and have it not die. I mean, I guess you can have it just die. You can swing with it and with a creature with greater power. So you need a whole bunch of hoops you got to jump through right out of the gate in order to get this ability to trigger. I got to attack with this creature. I need a creature with greater power. It only has to have a 2 power though. That's not bad. My Savior of Ollenbock attacks. It gets the +1/+1 counter on it. So now it's a 2/3. So less chance it dies, but still there's a pretty good chance that maybe you only get one use out of this guy. But even if you do get to exile at least one creature out of your graveyard. And then if it gets blocked and dies, you get to throw that creature into play. It's kind of a costly way to resurrect a creature out of your graveyard. Nevertheless, if you can get this off a few times, it's going to be really fantastic. So I got to give it a mention. But getting to the list, coming in at number 20, Wedding Announcement, 2 and a white enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, put an invitation counter on Wedding Announcement. If you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn, draw a card. Otherwise, create a 1/1 white human creature token. Then if Wedding Announcement has 3 or more invitation counters on it, transform it. And when you transform it, it turns into Wedding Festivity, which is also an enchantment, and it is an anthem effect, right? Creatures you control get +1/+1. I like this card a lot. I like the versatility of it. I always like cards that are doing lots of different things. It's card draw in white, so that's always good. It's going to only let you draw 3 cards maximum though, right? Because as soon as it has 3 counters on it, it's going to transform. I also like the at the beginning of end step trigger. I always like when they put that on cards so that you play it and you get that card draw immediately, or you get that 1/1 token, whatever the case may be. I think it's interesting that it's a human token, even though you look at the art, it seems like maybe it should be vampires. So they're inviting humans to their wedding. So what, that they can have them for dessert or something? I don't know what the story is here. Anyway, that doesn't really matter. You know, ironically, I think it fits more in a human theme than in a vampire theme because you're getting those human tokens. You know, I really like it in a deck like that where you are attacking a lot, because obviously once you get the card draw, it's going to then flip over into an anthem. So I think this definitely fits in a lot of decks. Coming in at number 19, Voice of the Blessed, and a lot of these sort of cards that fit in certain deck archetypes are going to be towards the bottom. I got to give these cards a mention because they're going to get lots of play, but because they fit in specific decks, I kept them towards the bottom of the list. White and a white Spirit Cleric 2/2. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on Voice of the Blessed. As long as Voice of the Blessed has 4 more +1/+1 counters on it, it has flying and vigilance. As long as it has 10 or more counters on it, is indestructible. So I had just mentioned Hero the Bredegard a couple of times in my last 10 cards videos, and a lot of similarities obviously of what's happening here. Obviously with this one, you're going to want to put it in a life gain deck. I think it's an auto include if you're in a life gain deck, of course, for which there is a ton of decks in white that are doing that, whether you're in mono white or Orzhov or Mardu. A lot of decks that I think this card is automatically going to slot into. Coming in at number 18, Dying to Serve, 2 and a black enchantment. Whenever you discard one or more cards, create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn. So obviously the once each turn thing there kind of has to be in there, or you could really go to town with this card. It keeps it sane anyway. Still though, you can do this on your opponent's turns as well, right? So I discard a card on my turn, I get a zombie, I do it on my next opponent's turn, get a zombie, the next opponent's turn, get a zombie. Again, in that archetype, I don't think this is necessarily a zombie theme, although my Gorax deck that I made from the last set is both a zombie theme and a discard theme, so this is an auto include in that deck, but for me, this is mostly, I'm in a discard theme. If you're in any black deck that's doing a discard theme, just getting that advantage of spitting out zombie tokens is going to be fantastic. Coming in at number 17, Cultivator Colossus, and I got to give this card a mention as well. Of course, it's gotten a ton of buzz already, I'm sure. 4 green, 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 so a 7 mana plant beast with trample, and it has power and toughness, each equal to the number of lands you control, so it goes great in any lands deck, but has this ridiculous ability of whenever it enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand into play tapped, and if you do, you draw a card and repeat the process. This goes combo crazy with abundance, obviously, because you can just make sure you draw a land when you do that card draw, then put it into play and continue, and it ends up putting all your lands into play. Pretty fantastic. For a 2-card combo, that's pretty good. When one of the pieces of the combo costs 7 mana, I'm totally okay with someone doing that in the game. They get all their lands into play, that's fine. It's not going to win them the game. They're going to have a giant trampling creature, so that's good. They're going to have a ton of lands in play, that's also good. It's not like it's an infinite win combo or anything like that though, so I don't know if I would build an entire deck around this idea, but I think this card definitely slots into a lot of decks. Even if you're not doing the combo, I think this goes in a landfall deck for sure. And we know there's a lot of those out there. Coming in at number 16, Hollowed Haunting, 2 white enchantment. As long as you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures you control have flying and vigilance. And whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a white spirit cleric creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of spirits you control. So like I said, I kept these archetype specific cards more towards the bottom, but this is definitely going to see a lot of play. I think it probably slots into any enchantment tribal deck. Not so much for the first ability as the second ability. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you're creating that spirit token. I think for that alone, you're definitely going to want to throw it in an enchantment tribal deck. Coming in at number 15, Thirst for Discovery. And I don't know if this is a card that people have really been talking about a lot. I think it's pretty fantastic. 2 and a blue, instant. Draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard a basic land card. I think that's pretty darn good. That's a pretty good draw spell, especially if you want the discard. You look at a card like Thirst for Knowledge, which is the obvious comparison here. 2 and a blue instant. Again, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 unless you discard an artifact card. That card gets used a lot in Commander, has been reprinted in several Commander sets. Typically though, people put it in an artifact themed deck because you're going to have lots of artifacts that you can then discard. Thirst for Discovery goes in any deck because you're always going to have basic lands. I guess if you're playing like a 4 or 5 color deck, maybe it doesn't fit because you aren't going to have a lot of basic lands, but in a 1 or 2 color deck with blue, I think this is fantastic because draw 3 cards and then discard a basic land, which usually late in the game, you're not going to really want anyway. I think this is a fantastic draw spell that can supplant a lot of draw spells that already exist in the format. Coming in at number 14, Sigardian Paladin, 2 green, white, human knight, 4/4. As long as you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature this turn, Sigardian Paladin has trample and lifelink. So in a +1/+1 counters theme, obviously you're going to want to play this. However, I think more importantly, you can pay 1 green and a white, target creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it gains trample and lifelink until end of turn. So again, obviously this is an auto include in any deck where you're doing a +1/+1 counters theme, which in green and white, there's a bunch of those. However, where I also like this card is in any deck where your commander has +1/+1 counters on it, and there's a whole bunch of those. And Azmir Holy Avenger, which I did on my Underwhelming Commanders video, is a perfect example of a creature where I'm not really doing a +1/+1 counters theme in that deck, but my commander is going to have a bunch of +1/+1 counters on it, so I'm going to be able to use that second ability and give my commander trample and lifelink until end of turn. I think that works fantastically in that deck, or a lot of other decks where you're going to have have +1/+1 counters on your commander. Speaking of which, next up we got Sigarda's Summons, 4 white enchantment. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have base power and toughness 4/4 and have flying and are angels in addition to their other types. So again, this is archetype specific, but I just think it's an auto include in any theme where you're putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures. You know, typically you're putting +1/+1 counters on creatures that are smaller and then get bigger the more counters they have on them. So if you give their base power and toughness a huge boost like that, they're going to be really big. Also, the flying doesn't hurt as well. So this is a card, again, that I think is just automatically going to slot in a lot of pre-existing decks already. Coming in at number 12, Change of Fortune, 3 and a red sorcery. Discard your hand, then draw a card for each card you've discarded this way. I like this card because you can use it in a couple of different ways where, yes, I can just discard my hand. Say I got 5 cards in hand, I discard it, it's all crap, I don't want it, and I just draw 5 new cards. So I could just draw a fresh hand. It's great if you're doing a wheel theme where you want to be discarding and drawing, like a Locust God deck, you're getting those triggers, but also it's really, really good in a way where I can discard a bunch of cards to other effects. Say I got a zombie infestation out, for example. I discard my entire hand to my zombie infestation, make a bunch of tokens, then I have Change of Fortune as the last card in my hand, I cast it, then redraw all the cards that I've just discarded to some other effect. So it's really great there as well. You can also get into the situation where I cast a Wheel of Fortune, discard my whole hand, draw 7 new cards, and one of those cards is Change of Fortune, which then I can cast and draw a whole bunch of cards. So you can get into some pretty crazy shenanigans there as well. Coming in at number 11, Shadowgrange Archfiend, 6 and a black, demon 8/4. When Shadowgrange Archfiend enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. You gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures sacrificed this way. I always love ETBs on creatures. I love forcing your opponents to sacrifice their best creature, so all of it's really good so far. 7's a lot, however, it has madness. You can pay 2 and a black and pay 8 life and cast it for its madness cost. I really like this card a lot. I think, first of all, it fits in every discard deck. If you're in a discard deck in black, this is 3 mana. I get an 8/4 into play. First of all, that on its own is pretty darn good. Even in a commander game, getting an 8/4 creature out that quickly is amazing. You pay 8 life, but you know what? You're going to gain a bunch of life back. So even if you just kill a 4/4 creature of your opponent's, you're going to gain 4 of that back. I think paying 4 life and 3 mana to get an 8/4 into play is pretty fantastic, on top of the fact that you're making your opponent sacrifice one of their best creatures. But even outside of a discard theme, I think this can fit in a resurrection graveyard theme, right, where I just cheat my creatures into play. It's got a really great ETB. It is an 8/4. You don't have to cast it for its madness cost. You can just cheat it into play. So I think it fits in a bunch of those themes as well. Also can fit in any sort of a blink theme if you're in a blinking theme in black, because it has that really fantastic ETB effect. So even though, you know, I think this is a guarantee in a discard theme, I ranked it a lot higher than Dying to Serve because I also think it fits in other themes as well, not just in a discard theme. Coming in at number 10 is Cemetery Protector, 2 white, human soldier, 3/4, has flash, which I really like. When it enters the battlefield, exile target card from a graveyard, which I really like. I always like graveyard hate in my commander decks. But more importantly, whenever you play a land or cast a spell, if it shares a card type with the exiled card, create a 1/1 white human creature token. So you can use this card in a bunch of different ways. You can just use it as graveyard hate, and if that second ability happens to trigger, added bonus. But you can engineer this to really take advantage of it. Coming in at number 9, Hullbreaker Horror. And again, this is another card that I just gotta give a mention. It's not gonna go in every deck, but man, this is a powerhouse of a card. 5 blue, Kraken Horror, 7 mana, right? 7/8 with flash. Again, I like the flash, and I like the fact that it can't be countered. It's always great when you have a really expensive card that can't be countered. Whenever you cast a spell, choose up to one of these abilities. And of course, we're casting spells all the time, so that's a pretty good trigger. You can either return target spell you don't control the owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So this card is bonkers. I mean, it's better than a Tidespout Tyrant, I think. Tidespout Tyrant can return lands to hand, but, you know, other than that, Everything about Hullbreaker Horror is better. It has flash, can't be countered. You can return spells you don't control the owner's hand, right? So, for example, your opponent casts, say, a board wipe, for example. Now you can cast something in response. I mean, you can just counter it, or I can cast a rapid hybridization, kill one of my opponent's creatures, and trigger my Hullbreaker Horror, which is going to return that board wipe to their hand. So, man, this guy's a powerhouse. I definitely think it could slot in a few decks. Probably a Spellslinger deck. I think it would be fantastic. Again, the flash there really fits the theme of a Spellslinger deck. Can be really fantastic for a deck like that to close out the game with. Speaking of which, coming in at number 8, Manaform Hellkite. 2 red dragon, 4/4 with flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX red dragon illusion creature token with flying and haste, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this spell. Exile that token at the beginning of the next end step. So again, for me, this fits really nicely into a Spellslinger deck. It can be a win con for that deck. I cast a spell on my turn, spit out a dragon, attack my opponent with it. You know, I guess you can put this in a dragon themed deck, but you know, you're casting non-creature spells to create dragons. For me, this is just sitting on the battlefield, similar to a Talrond, where I'm casting lots of non-creature spells anyway, so why not get the added bonus of spitting out a dragon token that if it's on my turn, I can swing with it and attack. If it's on an opponent's turn, I can use it as a blocker. Really fantastic value you're getting out of this card. I think it can fit in a ton of decks. Coming in at number 7, Ethereal Investigator, 3 and a blue, spirit 2/3 with flying. When Ethereal Investigator enters the battlefield, investigate X times, where X is the number of opponents you have. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. I probably have this card a lot higher than a lot of other people would. I like it a lot. I really like creatures with ETBs. You can blink them to get that effect again. You're likely going to get 3 clue tokens out of this, which is pretty good value, but also you're making those spirit tokens, which obviously you can do by cracking your own clues. I just love that this is doing so many things, right? It fits in an investigate theme. It fits in a blinking theme, I think. It fits in a spirit theme because you're making those tokens. It fits in any theme where you're just drawing lots of cards. It also fits in maybe an Adrex and Nev deck because you're making double the tokens in a deck like that. So in any sort of token doubler deck, I think it fits as well. I think this card slots nicely into a lot of different decks. I like it a lot. Coming in at number 6, Cemetery Gatekeeper. And this is one that maybe flew under the radar a little. I don't know. But for me, I saw it and I thought it was fantastic. 1 and a red, Vampire 2/1, has first strike. When Cemetery Gatekeeper enters the battlefield, exile a card from a graveyard. And whenever a player plays a land or casts a spell, if it shares a card type with the exiled card, Cemetery Gatekeeper deals 2 damage to that player. So this is a punishing effect, which I really like. I'm thinking you can get a land out of someone's graveyard. This is where this card can be really, really great. Also can just be good in any deck where you just want to punish your opponents for going off, right? I exile an instant card from a graveyard, right? Your opponent's playing a control deck. I can exile that counter spell from their graveyard that they just used, and now every single time they play an instant, they're going to get punished for it. So I just really like this card. I think it can fit in a lot of decks. On top of the fact that it's graveyard hate, again, we can just pick something that really isn't going to hurt us that much and is going to hurt our opponents a lot. Coming in at number 5, Glorious Sunrise, 3 green, enchantment. And there hasn't been a lot of green cards on this list. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose 1. Creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. That's fantastic and can fit into a lot of decks. Target land gains add 3 green until end of turn. That's something you're always going to want to use. Draw a card if you control a creature with power 3 or greater. That's entirely likely in a green deck. Or you gain 3 life. There's 4 really fantastic abilities there. I love the versatility. You know, I love modal cards, as I say all the time, in Commander, because depending on the situation of what you're doing, you might want to switch it up. Triggering at the beginning of combat on your turn, I also love because, again, we can play it on our first main phase and then it will immediately trigger. I really like that a lot. We can pump our whole team. We can do a mana boost. We can draw. We can gain life. I really like the versatility of this card. I think you could put this in any green deck and it's going to be doing lots of work for you. Coming in at number 4, by invitation only. And the names I don't love here. You know, I'm just thinking I'm playing a game and I'm like, I'm going to cast by invitation only. Seems like a really weird name, especially for a board wipe, which this is, and it's a fantastic one. Like I've said before many times, like in my What White Does Best video, every single set it seems like we're getting another fantastic board wipe for white. We just got one in the last set with Vanquish the Horde. This is another one that, again, I'm going to have to try to figure out how to fit it in my decks and what I'm going to take out. I think Cleansing Nova is finally going to get the old heave-ho. 3 white sorcery. Choose a number between 0 and 13. Each player sacrifices that many creatures. I really like this a lot. Again, I like the versatility. I also like the fact that it is a sacrifice, right? And sacrifice gets around indestructible. It gets around hexproof, gets around almost everything. You can just choose one, right? So if you want, maybe you have an opponent who's playing a Voltron deck. They have the one creature in play. You don't want to sacrifice a bunch of creatures. You choose this for one, and that opponent has to sacrifice that creature. Everyone has to sacrifice one creature. Or very unlikely that anyone's going to have more than 13 creatures in play. So this just becomes everyone's got to sacrifice all their creatures. Or I can go somewhere in the middle, right? Maybe I got 5 creatures. I want everyone else to sacrifice 4 so that I can keep my commander. I just love the versatility there where I can go anywhere between 0 and 13. Fantastic board wipe. Coming in at number 3, Overcharged Amalgam. 2 blue zombie horror. 3/3, again with the flash, which I really like. Also has flying and has exploit, right? Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. And of course, with any of these exploit creatures, they can sacrifice themselves to their own ability, which is really important, right? So you can use this ability even if you have no other creatures in play. By the way, I love the art. The art in this set in general is fantastic. The art on this card is really amazing, but not as amazing as this ability when Overcharged Amalgam exploits a creature, counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. I love this card. This card is going to go into maybe all of my blue decks. I mean, I just love the fact, yes, countering spells is always going to be good, but I really love the versatility, activated ability, or triggered ability. That's something that doesn't get used nearly enough in Commander. I think you could throw a Stifle in any blue deck and you're always going to find use for it. You just got to wait for the moment, right? You think about Craterhoof Behemoth. That's a card that I've died to more than any other in the game. That's a triggered ability. When they cast their Craterhoof Behemoth, it hits the battlefield. I mean, yes, with this card, you can just counter the Craterhoof Behemoth, but if you had a Stifle effect, you can stifle that ability. That's a triggered ability that's going to go on the stack. You can then counter that triggered ability so that none of their team gets +X in trample. And Aetherflux Reservoir, another card that I hate dying to in the format, that's an activated ability, right? This is a case where definitely you're going to want to do this with your Overcharged Amalgam. It's already in play. You can't counter it, but when they activate that ability and shoot you for 50 damage, you can throw this guy in play. He can sacrifice himself or another creature if you have something else you want to sacrifice, and you can counter that activated ability. I love the versatility here. I love that it has flash, flying. I love everything about this card. It's fantastic. Coming in at number 2, again, another card that I love everything about, and it's fantastic, and it's going to go in every green deck, I think, is Cemetery Prowler. 1 green, wolf, 3/4, has vigilance. Whenever Cemetery Prowler enters the battlefield or attacks, exile a card from a graveyard. So if you didn't know anything else about this card, that's enough. For me, that's enough of a card, a 3-mana 3/4 with vigilance that whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, I get to graveyard hate. I already am going to throw that in a couple of decks, all right? But on top of that, spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card type they share with cards exiled with Cemetery Prowler. So right away, I cast this, and if I'm in a green deck, it's probably creature heavy, so I'm probably going to go after a creature in a graveyard, which shouldn't be that difficult. As soon as it hits the battlefield, I exile a creature card from a graveyard, and now all my creature spells cost 1 less to cast. That's amazing. If I happen to exile an artifact creature, that is both an artifact and a creature, so now my artifacts and all my creature spells are going to cost 1 less to cast. Extra fantastic. I mean, and obviously as I attack with this, I can start exiling more and more stuff. And again, don't sleep on the fact that this is a fantastic graveyard hate card as well. I really like that about it. But now I'm going to reduce pretty much everything I cast now is going to cost 1 less to cast eventually as I attack with this card. This card is so good. I think it's probably going to see a ton of play in the format. I think it can easily slot into any deck and it's going to be great for you. And coming in at number 1 is Swords to Plowshares. 1 white mana instant. Exile target creature. Commander. Its controller gains life equal to its power. This card is amazing. Yes, I'm just kidding, of course. This is obviously just a reprint. It's a great reprint though, so I thought I would give it a mention. I really like the art. It's nice to see them reprint these Commander staples in these sets. They should really be doing that a lot more often. I'm actually making a video that's coming out right away about reprints that cards that I just can't believe have never gotten a reprint. It's amazing. If this wasn't a reprint, it would be the best card in the set, but it's not. The actual number one is Dollhouse of Horrors. And you know, I tend to push colorless cards towards the top of the list because they can go in any deck, right? And also cards that I think are just really fun and interesting, I also push to the top. And Dollhouse of Horrors, for me, is going to be number one. 5 mana artifact. You can pay 1 and tap, exile a creature card from your graveyard, create a token that's a copy of the exiled card, except it's an 0/0 construct artifact in addition to its other types, and it has this creature gets +1/+1. For each construct you control, it gains haste until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. So first thing to note here is that token doesn't go away. This is not make the token and then at the end step it disappears. It stays in play, so that's important. There's a lot of different ways you can use this. Obviously you can use it in maybe an artifact or construct theme, I suppose. I don't know if you want to do that. You can. It certainly will fit that theme. If you have a artifact theme that is also creature heavy, right? Remember, you got to exile a creature card from your graveyard. I think this is fantastic in a ETB theme. Any deck that has lots of ETB creatures, now I can exile that Eternal Witness from my graveyard, make a token copy of it, I get the ETB effect. I don't really care if it's a 1/1 or a 2/2 or whatever. Don't care that it's a construct, don't care that it's an artifact. I just want that ETB effect. Let's exile that Reclamation Sage from my graveyard and get that ETB effect as well. So I think it fits great in that theme. Also fits great in the theme of I just have giant creatures in my graveyard that I want their abilities. And I did this with my Offspring's Revenge deck, right? These cards are very similar where I want creatures with really fantastic abilities that I don't necessarily care if they're big, like an Avacyn. If I exile an Avacyn from my graveyard, now I get a, I don't know, 1/1 Avacyn or a 2/2 Avacyn, but who cares? All my stuff's indestructible, right? Or how about I exile a Drakuseth from my graveyard, and yeah, it's little, but it has haste, and when it attacks right away, I get that fantastic attack trigger that Drakuseth has. So that's another way you can use this card. I love that it's colorless and it can go in any deck. I love that it's versatile and you can do lots of different things with it. I love that it's just a fun, interesting card in Commander. Really, really great card. But that is it. That is my top 20 Commander cards from Innistrad Crimson Vow. And like I said, I do a 20 list when the set has a whole bunch of cards that I just got to talk about for Commander. This was overall a really fantastic set for the format, I think. At least half this list are cards that I think could go in any deck. And then there's a whole bunch of other cards that are just absolute staples for certain archetypes. So really, really great set overall. Really fantastic way to close out the year, I think. So what did you guys think of this set? Comment below. Are there any cards that I missed that you think are fantastic from the set that maybe I didn't mention on this list? I'm sure there's a few. There was a lot of cards in this set that could definitely get mentioned in a video like this. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.